Consumers and investors are both bracing for a flurry of reports this week, from earnings to jobs data. Since December, the Fed has implemented a quantitative tightening policy, pulling $95 billion out of circulation each month, which could result in extreme interest rate spikes as cash reserves level at banks needed to keep them functioning begins to shrink. The Federal Reserve is making several moves in hopes of a soft landing, but will any of it work? They seem to know the crash is inevitable, so they're pumping every pedal, flipping every switch they can reach, and turning down every dial they can find to make the crash less impactful. The good news is that the Fed is paying attention to the problem. The bad news is that they're using a set of tools that they don't have tremendous familiarity with nor control of the outcomes. Also this week, we are watching some dangerous escalations in Ukraine and a potential new war in Taiwan or the Russian-Finnish front line. Plus, stick around for a weekly giveaway. Here's what we need to know from news this week. Quantitative tightening. In its simplest terms, quantitative tightening, or QT as we're going to refer to it moving forward, it refers to the Federal Reserve's process of reducing the circulating money supply, typically by selling securities or decreasing the rate of asset purchases. Now, since December, they have been pulling $95 billion per month out of circulation, which impacts banks' operational liquidity levels, basically how much cash they have on hand to function. While textbooks are written on quantitative easing and tightening, I want to avoid diving that deep into that discussion. Instead, I'm going to tell you the pros and cons and what you should watch for. Now, the potential benefits of QT, or quantitative tightening, are: first, it helps to control inflation and stabilize prices. That by itself is undoubtedly the Fed's reason. QT also raises interest rates after a period of QE, or quantitative easing, which we have just left. Now, both Republicans and Democrats can probably get behind this third positive. QT reduces debt. And by reducing the money supply, QT can actually help reduce the levels of debt in the economy, which can burden long-term growth. Finally, QT serves to provide the Fed with greater monetary policy independence. I've warned for the last few years that the policy of dropping interest rates and printing money was depleting the tools that the Fed had to work with to maintain, stabilize, or even grow the economy. Now, if QT can be likened to waking up the day after the party, quantitative easing was a party. The sober morning may be rough, but it also makes you want to be more fiscally sound as you tally up the crazy spending from the night before. QT can also have some potential downsides, and this is what you should be watching out for. It can slow economic growth through higher interest rates. And while QT can benefit wealthy individuals and institutions that hold assets, it can negatively impact those who rely upon credit to finance spending, from farmers buying seed to small businesses using credit to purchase supplies. Financial markets, they're also put at risk, as we have seen from the circling of the wagons going on right now. QT can lead to market volatility, declining asset prices, and reduced liquidity, potentially leading to financial instability. Now, the huge potential downfall is that QT can be completely counterproductive. If implemented too quickly or at the wrong time, QT can reverse the positive effects of the previous monetary stimulus and put the economy into a deeper recession. According to a general definition of recession, 2 consecutive quarters of negative gross domestic product, or GDP, the U.S. entered a recession in the summer of 2022. Now, if you have made any purchases recently, you've seen the inflation implications of that. So far, things are working as planned. It is a huge and telling week for the economy. Following its first meeting of the year on Wednesday, the Fed is expected to raise interest rates by about just 0.25%, a sign that its campaign to slow inflation is working. However, and this is important to note, the Fed has never both pulled money from the economy, or QT, while raising rates at the same time. No one really fully knows the ramifications of this. It's really uncharted territory. Also, the January employment report drops this coming Friday, projected to show sustained job growth despite all the layoff headlines. Just a quarter-point raise in the interest rate indicates that the Fed is seeing an easing in inflation and that things are going the right way. Credit problems. Inflation may be easing, but more people are turning to their credit cards to offset the rising cost of everything. I'm not a financial planner or an advisor, but I know enough about finances to know that personal rising credit debt does it rarely end well for the consumer using credit. With this QT and economies worldwide still a bit unstable, even great job numbers and prices going down here and there may not really be enough for the average consumer looking to finance a purchase. Interest rates will rise and consumer credit will be tighter. As I mentioned, farmers or small businesses trying to buy what they need, they may find the terms less favorable and the credit tighter. The same can be said for the average consumer looking to purchase big tickets like a new work truck. Download the Prepper's Recession-Proof Economic Collapse Guide today. I'll post a link in the description and comments section below, or visit cityprepping.com/moneyprep for a free guide to help you start recession-proofing your life and emerging even stronger when the economy recovers. Axis Economies. While the success of the U.S. economy positively impacts many countries worldwide, our adversaries would beg to differ. On Sunday, Iran and Russia, they both inked a deal to link their banking systems. In previous videos, we warned about 3 possible moves in the rise of a BRIC, B-R-I-C, system to replace the SWIFT system. This recent banking partnership between diplomatically isolated regimes lessens the brunt of economic sanctions. And this partnership links 700 Russian and 106 non-Russian banks from 13 different countries. This is also a secret deal for the most part. Neither Russia nor Iran are revealing the foreign banks involved in this deal. This gives Russia a means to move its rubles and churn its economy. It could open up Tehran a mechanism to circumvent sanctions over its nuclear program. We will be watching this closely over the next few months, and you can expect these secret alliances to increase so long as the Russian-Ukrainian war drags on into this next year. Global food shortages. Thai rice, a benchmark for Asia, has soared to the highest in almost 2 years. Strong demand lies at the heart of the rally, with some importers buying more of the grain to replace wheat after the war in Ukraine disrupted their supplies. And despite the war and the subsequent shortfall of wheat supply for the world, rice prices remain relatively stable through 2022, and that may be changing in a big way. The global food supply is really frailer than most realize. One of the world's largest fertilizer companies, Norwegian chemical company Yara International, warns that every country, even those in Europe, may be facing a food crisis shortly. Much of Putin's gambit has been thwarted by a warmer than expected winter, and energy supplies rerouted from around the world to fill the gaps. Fertilizer, however, is another story. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent sanctions and embargoes, the world relied heavily on Russian natural gas to produce ammonia and nitrogen byproducts from it for its fertilizers. If fertilizer is in short supply or prices remain unaffordable to many countries, farmers may be unable to keep their soil fertile enough for crops. This is one of the main reasons you're seeing higher natural gas prices at the moment. Unless there's some favorable global weather to naturally boost yields that will offset the need for some fertilization, we may be looking at a perfect storm of reduced supply, high demand, and some countries just simply being priced out of the market. That leads to food insecurity, migrations, and political upheaval on a large scale as people worldwide reel in hunger. Do take the time now to prepare your food supplies, because this will be a long, drawn-out decline in agricultural output that will have some pretty sharp shortages for many. Take your food security seriously. There are several economic warning signs, from quantitative tightening to Russia building secret monetary alliances to direct warnings of a looming global food shortage. There's so much uncertainty out there at the moment that we only know with certainty that the future looks bleak in many respects. Expect things to remain tight through this year, and tighter still if we see really any significant abandonment of the SWIFT monetary systems. Prepare your finances just as you would prepare your food and water. What do you think? Where are you feeling the full force of this economic challenge? Tell us your thoughts in the comment section below. Russia, Ukraine. If you had hoped that the Russian-Ukrainian war would have wrapped up within the first year, you can forget about that. February 24th will be the first anniversary of Russia's most recent full-scale assault on Ukraine. Crimea was attacked initially on February 20th of 2014, so we can reasonably expect any Russian offensive around that same week in February. Putin may be regrouping, but he isn't resting. The NATO Security General Jens Stoltenberg grimly said that there is no sign that Vladimir Putin is preparing for peace. To the contrary, he is mobilizing another 200,000 or more troops for a renewed, possible blitzkrieg-style assault. Russia is acquiring more weapons from states like Iran and North Korea, even as it ramps up its production. Putin's future is really tied to his success or failure in the war, with rumors swirling around his health and his fears of a coup. The Kremlin remains furious about the supply of weapons to Ukraine, calling the conflict a hybrid war with the West. Still, hundreds of tanks and armaments are flowing into Ukraine ahead of the Russian second wave. Putin is really hanging his hopes for a victory on a war of attrition. If the Kremlin can keep throwing men and materials into the war, they hope to gain the upper hand. Russian capabilities and morale suffer, but is it enough to change the tide of this conflict? This winter's slowdown of ground activities, regrouping, and restocking of forces will all come to a head when spring arrives. The Western forces know this, so they're increasingly throwing more and more weapons and resources into Ukraine, even with the risk of creating a war between NATO and Russia. Zelensky knows time is his most valuable weapon right now as well. In his latest address, he phrased it like this: Russia hopes to drag out the war to exhaust our forces, so we have to make time our weapon. We must speed up the events, speed up the supply and opening of the new necessary weaponry options for Ukraine. On other fronts, Erdogan and Turkey have signaled that they might approve Finland's application to join NATO ahead of Sweden's. Sweden and Finland, they both applied jointly to become members of the military alliance, dropping their long-standing military non-alignment following Russia's war on Ukraine. NATO requires unanimous approval of its existing members to add new ones, but Erdogan's government has said that it would only agree to admit Sweden if the country met its conditions regarding the designation of some anti-Turkey groups as terrorist organizations. Turkey is also demanding Sweden extradite alleged PKK militants and some followers of a Muslim cleric that was accused of the 2016 attempted coup. And that isn't likely to happen, and Erdogan may seek to inflame these tensions by approving Finland, but leaving Sweden open to potential Russian aggression. The approval of Finland could open an additional front in Putin's war with NATO. And perhaps the most alarming news of this conflict is that Russia threatens to end all nuclear arms control measures. Russia told the United States on Monday that the last remaining pillar of bilateral nuclear weapons control would expire in 2026 without a replacement due to what it said were U.S. efforts to inflict strategic defeat on Moscow and Ukraine. U.S.-Russia talks on resuming inspections under the New START treaty were called off at the last minute in November of 2022. And the sides have not agreed on a time frame for new talks. And this could lead to a massive nuclear arms buildup in the future and in secret right now. And most alarming for the average global citizen is that the World Health Organization is urging countries to start stockpiling medicines for nuclear emergencies after the EU's latest warning on Putin. Included in their warning was a list of medicines that governments should consider stockpiling for radiological or nuclear emergencies. And the potential scenarios where these nuclear events could occur, they include emergencies at nuclear power plants, as we're witnessing could potentially happen in Ukraine, to the intentional use of radioactive materials and weaponry. You can expect the nuclear threat to continue as the war rages on into the future. Will the thawing of Ukraine in the spring bring about a complete meltdown of global peace? Will Western armaments and Russian mobilization bring a new, deadlier chapter to this conflict? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. For this week's giveaway, we're going to be giving away a survival garden seed kit. To enroll for a chance to be entered into the giveaway, just simply post a comment below. And next week, I'll use a tool to draw a winner from the comments of this video randomly. And I'm not going to reach out to you unless your name appears on the screen next week. Please ignore and report any comments telling you that you've won because it's not me. Now, for last week's winner of the Baofeng Radio, we used a tool to draw the name from the comments section randomly, and the winner was Wayward Cajun Farms. I'll reach out to you shortly to get those sent to you. China. General Mike Minahan, head of Air Mobility Command, wrote that his gut tells him that the U.S. will go to war against China in 2025. Why that date? Well, Taiwan's election in 2024, combined with the U.S.'s own election that year, will create ripe conditions for President Xi Jinping to attack Taiwan. President Biden has said several times that the U.S. military would respond if China invaded Taiwan. I don't know if a general's gut feeling is enough of a basket to put all your eggs into, but still, one thing is sure. The Russian-Ukrainian conflict, the global economy, and Russia's ability to skirt sanctions or even create an alternate banking system all hinge on China's inevitable involvement in the endeavor. No country wants to anger China when global relations are so strained, but the U.S. feels compelled to clarify that they will not accept any Chinese intrusions in Taiwan or elsewhere. Now, while the Pentagon denies that these are their views and points out that they are just an expression in an internal memo from a commander to a subordinate leadership, it does indicate that the U.S. is fully aware of the Chinese threat of a land grab. It is readying the armed forces for that possibility. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, he walked back the sentiment earlier this month when he said that he seriously doubted that ramped up Chinese military activities near the Taiwan Strait were a sign of an imminent invasion of the island by Beijing. Either way, we will watch China's moves as they relate to militarization, support for Russia, or simply global market and resource manipulation. If anything piques our interest, we will let our subscribers know here. Do you think China will take advantage of the distraction Russia is creating in Ukraine to conduct a land grab of its own? If so, when do you think that might occur? Let us know in the comments below. One thing is certain, it is that we face some uncertain times ahead. This week, we will get wanted and unwanted clarity on the health of our economy. And we see an escalation just short of a nuclear escalation in the Russian-Ukraine war. And we have a general sincerely warning his forces about his gut feeling that the world is about to explode into a much more significant global conflict. If ever there was a time to be prepared, this is probably it. As always, stay safe out there.